My name is Sara Stojaković and I recently graduated landscape architecture at the University of Zagreb. So the topic of my presentation will be the waterfront transformations in a traditionally port city of Rijeka that is on the northern part of the Adriatic Sea. So just a short introduction. In general, the restructuring or the transformation of former industrial areas and is like really a process that characterizes contemporary cities. We've seen it on the example of Pittsburgh, but it's really like, we can say it's a trend today in an urbanism. And the most prominent areas are exactly the ones along the coasts, along the river coasts and the sea coasts, the waterfronts, which are especially valuable because of the importance they have for the image of the city and for the life of this city, and because of their high visibility inside of the wider area. So there are many cities in the world who have transformed successfully and less successfully their waterfronts, such as Boston, Vancouver, Toronto, Sydney, London. These are just some of the most famous projects, and also in Europe, like more recent are in Oslo, Stockholm, Bremen, and Hamburg. So this is the exact position of the city of Rijeka. It's not a very big city. It has around 150,000 inhabitants, but in scale of Croatia, it's like the third biggest city. And it's situated on an important maritime traffic route on the northern Adriatic. And the importance of this geographical situation is also that we have like not just one harbor, Rijeka, but there is also Trieste harbor, which is really nearby, and another third harbor, Kopar in Slovenia, which has been developing for the last 50 years or so. So these are the main routes of transport that bring goods into the larger part of the Middle Europe. So, as I mentioned, the image of a city is that it's a traditionally really port and industrial city, because industry is always a related function with the port function. And as a spatial consequence of this, the industrial and port complexes occupy a really long stripe along the coast. As you can see, it's like entirely artificial with quays, breakwaters, and so on. And the result for the city life is that there is a serious lack of public spaces, especially of the public spaces along the seacoast. So, but at the same, these are, let's say, the problems. But at the same time, we have two processes in a contemporary city or in a post-industrial city that are going on. One is deindustrialization, or we can say also decline of industry, and the other is dislocation of port and industrial activities, which is typical for the ports that don't have the spatial capacity to further develop, which is a case with Rijeka, because it is also has a very steep terrain, so there is not much territory for development. And also why I call, I don't know, like deindustrialization can be seen as a, globally maybe as a partially positive aspect, but in Rijeka it has mostly really negative implications, because it followed the disintegration of Yugoslavia and the really disastrous privatization of many public companies that eventually led to bankrupt or to liquidation of a large number of important industry for the city. So anyhow, we have a lot of free areas that have been freed from the industrial use, and now they present really big potentials for making a new image of a city and for transforming it into more urban programs and more urban spaces or civic spaces. I would just go one step back and mention the port typology, which is typical for all the port cities, because they all have some similar features and a very specific harbor atmosphere, and that's why there is also a term of a port city, which is more than just a city and a port, because there is a very complex relationship, a set of very complex relationships between the ports and the cities, which are both spatial and administrative. Also, like a massive transformations of natural landscape are happening on these places, like that completely transform the natural coasts by huge earthworks into a completely man-made environment. So that's why we talk about port or harbor landscape. And these processes are like in a permanent dynamics, and that's why this deindustrialization of these areas, I see it also as a part of these dynamics. So what I was saying, we can hardly tell one port apart from each other unless we really know it. So this is Rijeka, and like, it's not that different image from Bremen, or Shanghai is much bigger. But okay, so I will just quickly go through the spatial development through the history, because it tells us something about the conditions in the city today. So the city was always connected with the river, and the first harbor, the first port was inside of the river mouth since the ancient times, and even we have like a link with the name, because Rijeka actually literally means the river. And so not much has changed since, during the Middle Age, 15th, 16th, even 17th century. There was just like a really, really small fisherman's quay in front of the old city that was this compact medieval city, and the port activity that was going on inside of the river. So beginning of the 18th century, some larger development occurred, like building of a quarantine on the western part of the city, and which is actually like a beginning of a modern port. Then, continuing in the 18th century, Rijeka was also part of the Habsburg monarchy, and the first spatial plan was developed that led to building of a city district in front of the old city walls on a filled terrain. And so in in the 19th century, the city actually receives the outlines that are more or less kept until this day. And this is the image of. Yeah.
Question: what was this triangle?
This one. Yeah, it's just from the old maps. It's just a demarcation of one area, and yeah, so the port had inside of the river had problems because a lot of the particles from the rivers were being collected, and like the river was cluttered, and so the port functions were difficult. Yeah, it was difficult to conduct them, and that's why the municipality decided to dig another channel that would leave this one for port use, and in between there was this area that is today called Delta area because of this shape. So it's just the shape of this parcel that was really very, very...
It's empty now, or?
No, we will come to this. It's completely transformed. It's really completely transformed. So this is in how the coastline looks today, and this is officially all part of the port authority, but it goes even more to the west side of the industrial complexes and so on. And this is the sketch of the different port basins that the original port spread into. So. Because of a lot of difficulties in the 90s, and because the port became old, there is a process that is called, not a process, that the process of modernization began within the Gateway project, which is financed by a World Bank. And this project actually has three components. It has a road component or traffic component, harbor component, and an urban component, or the one that relates to the civic use of the waterfront. And I will focus a bit more onto this urban component because it's some of the steps of making the waterfront more civic have already been made. So the part of the port that is accessible to public is the passenger port that is really adjacent to the old city. And for example, a terminal building was built for the ferry traffic, and after 50 years of being disused, the Mololongo breakwater was also opened for as a public promenade that's around 2 kilometers long. So some of the things are starting to change, but not on a really big scale. And now we come to sketch that actually shows the areas which are at the moment abandoned and or derelict inside Rijeka, and these are really areas which have a significant surface because, for example, this is the old city core, so you can compare it with the rest of the city tissue. And I will just quickly go through each of these spaces and I will focus later on the Mlaka area of the former refinery. So this is the area that's called Delta area, also today, but this is the shape how it looks today. And the genesis of this place is quite interesting because it's a result of centuries of earthworks and of both by transformations both by nature and man-made. And actually, this part of the waterfront, since it's really in the near city center, it's the central part of the before mentioned Gateway project, and is intended to be transformed into the southern part into the mixed-use area, a large public park and a waterfront, and also into a nautical marina. And at the moment there is international urban architectural competition for this area is running. So the second area is the Hartera paper mill, which was like founded in the beginning of 20th century and is one of the symbols of industrial production in Rijeka, because a lot of, like, for instance, the first steam engine was introduced in Croatia here, and it's also on the river, so it used the energy of the river for its facilities, and now it's being disused. So in the 90s, the factory bankrupt, and some of the buildings are used, but not on a larger scale. There was an idea to make a promenade along the river with Hartera as one of the landmarks along the way, and also really already well-known music festival is being held there every summer, but there is no constant use. Then the factory Torpedo is also interesting site, because actually in this area the first torpedo was invented, and later there was a famous torpedo factory, which was in the Yugoslavia. The factory was transformed into a factory of tractors. I don't know in English. How is it? Yeah, okay. So what you see in this picture is a launching station of the torpedo, which is actually protected monument of the industrial heritage. But as you see, it's in a really, really bad condition. And there were some like initiatives to repair it and to trying to preserve it, but they are really, really slow at the moment. But this area is quite big. I'm just showing you the biggest like asset or landmark of it. And the last thing that I will go a little bit deeper in is the area of a former oil refinery and petroleum port at Mlaka city district, which you can see on the sketch where is in relation to the city center, so it's not that far away. So basically this is the area of the refinery. You can see that it's like really not paved, but covered with a really dense network of industrial facilities, especially in its middle part. And this is the photo from the old days. Well, actually before the refinery was built in 1889, this site was a quarry. Before that it was, let's say, a nature. And the industrial activity in the area was moved. Most part of it was moved in the 60s because the refinery didn't have any more space to develop. But some parts of the activity were held until 2009, and in 2009 it was finally completely abandoned. So there are some, yeah. So I chosen this area mostly because the plans and the visions for it are the most vague of all the previous areas that we've seen. So this is the view from north to the sea, and also of the massive railway infrastructure in the southern part. This is a view towards the central part of the factory that is on a flat plateau, and the entrance into the port. So it's really basically disused at the moment. Oops. So after the industry was terminated, the city proposed changes in the spatial plan that would allow a transformation of this area. But the biggest shortcoming of this, as I see it, is that only the middle part of the area is taken into consideration, not taking into account the waterfront and the former port, which are the most important and most valuable parts of the area. So, in short, the main advantages of the area are its good traffic connections, the proximity to the city center, but at the same time, these strong traffic corridors are also dividing this area into separate units. And there is it has an interesting surrounding. So it really it's on the border with the former torpedo factory, which also should be redeveloped. And Fisherman's Harbor is intended to be built there. Also, the Port Authority is planning to build another multifunctional, how do you say, harbor terminal. There is a shopping center nearby, and also like a green corridor from the northern side. So I identified some of the characteristics, like landscape characteristics of different areas, which are really intersected by these traffic corridors, and they're really different. So the lower point is really has this maritime atmosphere, and this railway tracks that are already grown into grasses, the platform, not the platform, but the plateau that's like mainly industrial, and this northern part that's already has lush vegetation. And also these are some landmarks or interesting points in the area that could be used in the further redevelopment of the area. So I will go through all of them, but you can see. Based on the analysis that was a bit more deep than I showed you, I came to some ideas, goals, and challenges that are important in transformation of this former industrial area, which are the preservation of existing character. Then, most important, maybe the opening of the area towards the sea as its most important asset. Then, keeping the production or a tradition of productivity inside of the area, reuse of the industrial heritage. So introducing multifunctional uses inside of the area, and also really integrating it into its surrounding area and into surrounding urban tissue. And this is I will show it to you just as a picture, as a vision of what was the final result of the thinkings that I was doing. But it's really just one of the image and the possibilities into the design, where I try to incorporate some of the things mentioned below. So that would be all, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Sara.
Yeah.
Questions?
Are some of the factories still working, or is any part of the whole industrial port area?
There are some activities going on along this main street, and which is a really good thing. But it's mainly because the places, there are like buildings, and the places to rent there are quite cheap, because it's still qualified as an industrial site in the plans, and it's still cheap. So yeah, there is something going on, but not much, and not in the potential that could be used really. The population of Rijeka, it's around 150,000. Yeah, it's not really big. I mean, yeah, it's big in Croatian terms, because like Zagreb has around 700 to 800,000 people, and in whole of the Croatia it's like 4.5 million.
But it's still like a big city compared to what it could have, or what they could.
So we benefit
A big
from-
port towards the city is no port.
Yeah.
It seems like enormous for the port, or yeah, it takes up a really big part of the territory, but yeah, but this is the case in most of the port cities. Like if you take a look at Rotterdam, and if you take a look at like any port cities, like these port facilities are really large because they need a lot of space to have all the containers and all the cranes and everything. So this activity just consumes a lot of territory. So yeah.
I was wondering, some of the areas are really like looking cool, you know, in a way.
Yeah,
So if there's some activity.
No, there are some, not very much. For example, one is this music festival that's being held in the river canyon. That's one. There are some smaller cultural activities, and also there is, for example, a society that organizes conferences about the industrial heritage. So, like this topic or this theme is present in the public, but there are no larger projects that have really been already implemented, and that could serve as a flagship project or like a push factor for the city. Good.
Okay.